Another famous location in Yosemite, and I've passed that many times. It's maybe 40 feet off the main road. And I look over and I see this, and of course, being there all year long. So when there was a major snowstorm and everything was covered with the snow and ice, what a phenomenal opportunity to photograph that. And in the original print, if you can see it here on the left side, there's detail with a mountain behind the tree, and up in the upper right, there's detail. So there's, even in the bright areas, the snow, nothing is blown out in the print. There's texture in all of the white areas. He has two versions of this tree. One is this one, and the other one is took an image, a negative with more of the trees that are on the right-hand side. And when I went into the Ansel Adams Gallery in Yosemite about 6 years ago, they had both prints. And actually, I like this print much better than just the tree by itself. But this has also been produced on a poster, and it's one of the highest selling posters ever. It's just such a beautiful piece. This is my other favorite. This one and this one are my two overall favorites of his work. This one, El Capitan, Winter Sunrise, coming down into the valley area, just walking down from the road to the Merced River, and you look across at El Capitan, and here are the trees on the side. Now look at the contrast range of this image. The dark shadow areas, everywhere there is shadow on that left-hand side and anywhere else, those pine trees, there is detail. And the highlight on El Capitan and the clouds, detail. Think about the amount of f-stops from the highlights to the shadow in this image. And in order to keep this on the negative, Ansel came up with the process of compensating development. He would develop the negative in a way that the highlights would develop at a different rate than the shadows. And therefore also then he was taking multiple images of the same shot so that he could experiment as he was developing them and then decide what the final development process should be to have his print the way he wanted. This is spectacular print. See this print in person is just beautiful. Also along the road, in the main road in the valley, he saw this tree and he loved the shape of it. But this was shot in 1944. And to me, okay. Then he came at another time with the light coming from behind. And one of the things I've learned a lot from Ansel is the use of backlight, side light, rather than just front light or soft light. If we come back to this, there's backlight there, but it's not coming through the tree. It's just light on the background. When he came by this day and he saw that light coming from the side, sort of from the side and the back. And I kept trying to find that location. I wanted to see where that was. And I thought, oh, it must be up in the hills. So I talked to John Sexton. He said, John, when you go around such and such, go down 1/4 of a mile and it's 15 feet off the side of the road. Okay. And I did, and I found it. Oh, another little story. So I had my 5x7 camera with me, and I thought, I'll just take the shot. So I'll get down here and set up my tripod, and I got all the film sheets together and so on. I shot it and got home, and no matter what I tried to do to develop that negative, it never worked. So I never got a shot of it. And I kept thinking, it's Ansel saying, get out of here, go get your own location, find your own shots that you want to do. So his most famous shot, which is not one of my favorites of his, but has sold the most of all of his prints, is Moonrise over Hernandez. And this is how it's produced and sold. It was sold in New York for $1 million recently. And okay, fine. But here's what happened. It was late in the evening. They were headed home. And he had his son with him and a friend. And he jumped out of the car because he saw the moon and he knew that the light was leaving very quickly on the foreground. He jumped out of the car. He asked his friend to get the tripod. So they're rushing it up, and he guessed at what the exposure should be based on the light from the moon. Here's the original print that he made. Yes, this is not a proof sheet print. This is a print that he made. This is in 1941. That's the original print from the negative. So that is a proof print. He then made this print as a final print in 1941. The sky is a little darker. He's bringing it out. In 1943, he darkened the sky a little bit more, and you see he's creating more contrast in the lower levels. Now he's evolving the aspect of how he wants a print to look from an original negative. 1962, much darker sky. It's very close now to the way he produces this as a final image, but he wasn't happy with how the buildings would not stand out because the bottom of the negative, this is an 8x10 negative, was a little flat in exposure. So he dipped the negative, handheld the negative, and dipped it into selenium tenor. Selenium. Anyway, selenium. And it created a contrast just to a selenium toner, is what I'm trying to say. Selenium toner. And that made the bottom of the negative more contrasty than the rest of the negative. And he could make this print so that the buildings would stand out. And this is the print that sells the best and is considered one of his best. It's not the ones I like the best, but I understand. We all ever think about this, 1941, and not until 1975 that he gets the final version that he wants. So fine art photography, Ansel came up with the definition. It's in his books. First thing, good shadow detail in areas where the viewer would expect to see detail. That doesn't mean you may not have black in your image, but if your viewer expects to see detail, then it should have detail in the shadow areas. Meaningful highlights have detail, texture. They should not be paper white. No large areas of pure black unless used in a creative way to enhance the meaning of the image. So many people would say, well, what are you talking about? He says you have to have detail in the shadows, but he says, oh, no, he didn't say that every image you produce, every print you produce should have detail in the shadows. It's whether or not that's used in a creative way. If you are showing an image, a print, a full tonal range, then if your viewer expects to see detail in the shadows, they should see it, and texture in the highlights. The creative use of leading lines and containment lines. Ansel is an expert and one of the best in composition, leading lines, and what are called containment lines, and I'll talk about that. A balance of tones that provide an emotional content. And you remember the Moonrise over Hernandez, and by 1975 that it has an emotional content to it. So good shadow detail in areas where the viewer would expect to see detail. Here's my favorite image, and you look to see, and here's another one he produced, and you look at those and you will see detail in the shadows of those images. And the prints are just beautiful detail in those shadows. No large areas of pure black unless used in a creative way. Well, this on the left is one of Ansel's prints, and he is using it as a creative way to express this scene. And the viewer is not expecting to see detail in the shadows. But that is not the case with White House ruins. So yes, he used black and he used it in very creative ways. Meaningful highlights area have detail. No paper white without detail. Well, how about a scene like this? Think of the contrast range of the shadows to the highlights in these clouds. And Ansel was always sensitive to that and would do compensating development of the negative so that when he was making the print, the highlights would have texture and the shadows would have detail. The creative use of leading lines, containment lines. This image is shot right from where Ansel lived in the valley. Came out his door and this is what he would see. This is up the coast, San Francisco, the Bay Bridge. On the left-hand side, that tree on the left is called a containment. And the limbs above Half Dome are containments, meaning they're containing the viewer's eye to where he wants you to go. So as you come in from the left, you really come in from the images, any images from the left, and look across the image. So how would he keep you from going back off the left-hand side or off the right-hand side? And how does he control what he wants you to see? Those are called containments. If you look at the Bay Bridge, there's a leading line, the water leading you right to the bridge. So he had to position himself to get to that location. This one of the lines leading you right up to what he wants you to see. And we'll come back and see that again. Go back the other way. So those leading lines and the dark against the light to create that three-dimensionality. And you notice that there's this darker area on the right-hand side, which is a containment to bring you back into the lighter areas of the image. And you notice that's a little darker against the light areas behind it, three-dimensionality. This is before the Bay Bridge was built. And it talks about in his book that he got up one morning and he saw these beautiful clouds. And so he ran to this location to get an image of it. So here's the horizontal line. And he talks about rule of thirds, and you do not want to have the horizon right in the middle because then you're not emphasizing the foreground or the upper part of the image. So he has that lower, which means he's emphasizing the upper portion of the image. The bridge gets built. Here's that image that I showed you just before, the Golden Gate and the bridge. Now, this is the proof sheet of the negative. So you see he has detail in the shadows everywhere, detail, texture in the highlights. He then does the darkroom work to bring this image to life. And so many times somebody would say, oh, well, it's just right out of the camera. Absolutely not. He was a master at the darkroom. Today, you become, I'll use the term, a master at Photoshop or Luminar software or Topaz Labs software to do things. We're not working in the darkroom. We are working in what I call the digital darkroom. So yes, we are doing darkroom work. We're simply doing digital darkroom. Let's take this apart a little bit. Here's a rule of thirds. You see where the PowerPoints are. Here are leading lines. Look at those lines leading you in, not just the water, but the placement of the bridge for the PowerPoint and the leading lines of the mountains all work together to pull that image together for you. This is a very common area, not common, but a beautiful area in Yosemite. I've passed it a number of times also on the road and went down to look at it and had not his actual print, but a copy of his print with me. And a number of things come together. He was so sensitive to all the elements within an image compositionally. Watch. Here is that containment on the left and on the right, those white flower tree aspects pushing you back down from the right side back into the image, containments. Look at that tree in the background. Had he moved to the left, that would have pushed that tree back into the trees on the right and would not have that standing out. If he moved to the right, that would have moved those into those tree trunks coming up. And so he would not have that back there. So he's sensitive to that tree being in the back. How about in the lower right corner? That rock is very important. He could have moved in farther and photographed that with the water flowing straight out. But here's what's important. So he has a lead-in line so that you can come back down and stand there. And if the water is coming down, it's leading you down to the right-hand corner. And that darker area by the rock and the rock pushes your eye back into the lighter area of the stream. Very important. In fact, let's take it apart a little bit. If I take the rock out, now your eye goes right off that side. Even if I put the white water in there as it flows through, it makes it worse. Your eye follows the white water right out. So that was very important to have that in the darker area to create a containment and to push your eye back into the image. So to go back that way. And here is a place to stand. I came up with that concept simply by looking at a lot of his images and thinking, what's the difference of how he did the composition versus what I see? Now, keep in mind the place to stand. I'll talk about that again shortly. Clearing winter storm. You notice the foreground, the trees in the foreground on the lower right side creates that foreground aspect, three-dimensionality, foreground, middle ground, background. They are containments, as is El Capitan on the left-hand side, containments to bring you into the same part of the image. And in the center, in the highlight area, is half dome. But here you have the dark against the light and the light, dark against light on the other side to create that three-dimensionality. And you notice that he has a balance of tones in the corners, the upper corners. It isn't just light in one corner and dark in the other. He is very sensitive in all of his prints to the balance of tones. And here's that foreground. The center of the image, which is the brightest area, and detail in that center area. If you ever have a chance to see an original print of this, of Clearing Winter Storm, it is superb. This is an interesting place also down in Tucson. And I went down there to see where he photographed. And I actually walked into this portion of the church. And as I saw it and was standing there and also had remembered his image and then came back and looked at his image again on the web, I thought, oh, it's interesting that he photographed it that way, where he could have photographed it like that. I'm just cropping this and I'm back to it. So you see the full image here. And for me, that pillar in the middle, that post, created two images for me. But he has, of course, the structure, which is really good on both sides. The tonal range is very good, shadow detail everywhere. But I thought, wow, it's really interesting that each part of this could stand on its own. This is one part of that image, and this is the other part. Not as interesting, but that is interesting to see the entire image and think they could stand on their own. Ansel's three-dimensional techniques. I've talked about that a little bit already, but let's look a little deeper. This also is one of the images that I've really enjoyed because I've stood in this location. This also is 10 feet off the main road. Now, it doesn't always have the water in the foreground. It has to be a certain time of year. But let's look at this image as a compositional structure. First of all, there's a place to stand. There are containments on the right-hand side and the left-hand side, that little darker tree on the left-hand side, sorry. You come in from the left, you come over, that larger tree on the right pushes your eye back in. And when you come back over to the left, that little tree there keeps you back into the center of the image. And there's something that I had studied and saw in all of his images that I call dark light, which creates three-dimensionality. And I've never seen that written anywhere, but I kept seeing it in his work. Let's look at this without the tree on the right. You see how your eye falls off that right-hand side? So very firm, conscious compositional structure. Without that, you fall off the right-hand side. Without the foreground, without a place to stand, you're only looking at his image. You have the place to stand, let's go back to that. If you have the place to stand, you feel you are part of the image, that you can feel yourself being there. But if you don't have that foreground, you are looking at it. You're not feeling you're in it. Come back to my other favorite one. Dark against the light against the dark. Here's the dark, light, dark, light. And I saw that in all of his prints and thought, wow, this isn't just by accident. He is really sensitive to the light throughout the images. And I've not seen that written in any of his books, but if you look at his prints, they all have that going for them. Rule of thirds, very strong composition. How about abstract art? Yes, he did abstract art. The one you saw earlier, the high country, Craig's Moon, Sunrise, Kings Canyon, very striking artistic image, abstract. Dunes, Oceano, and this is just north of Los Angeles is Oceano sand dunes, and very artistic. Look at the triangle, 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 very interesting. Triangle, inverse triangle. His images and his compositions are really so strong. That's the lightest area, and there's detail in that area. But he doesn't have detail in this print in the shadow area because I assume his presentation is to say, I don't want your mind to expect to look into that area. The creation of fine art photographs, here's his influence on me. This is my shot from the Great Sand Dunes. And one of my favorites of mine is Cathedral Spire. I was walking along the edge of the Merced River, which is in the bottom part here, and I saw those clouds coming from the left. So I just kept shooting until they came right above Cathedral Spire and captured that image. And you notice the tree on the left. It's a containment. El Capitan, down at the Merced River, the trees on the left, containments, the highlights against the light trees against the darker mountain, the light mountain against the darker sky, detail down in the shadow areas. He had a tremendous influence on me. Was there in the winter, the most extraordinary time to be in Yosemite is when it is snowing, which is usually in February, January, February, of course. And it is spectacular. It's so beautiful, it's hard to even understand how pretty it can be. Did a panorama, standing down at the Merced. President Gerald Ford in 1975 met with Ansel, and President Jimmy Carter in 1980 presented him with the Presidential Medal of Freedom. If I could return in 20 years, I would hope to see astounding interpretations of my most expressive images. And his negatives are in Tucson, and they are available to be used by students, not to make final prints and take home, but to be used to learn how to make prints. And I thought it's so interesting that he would say, hope to see astounding interpretations. And also, I think he would think that the digital darkroom is just as effective and maybe even more so than the actual wet darkroom. So what was the name of Ansel's burrow? Nobody knows, I'm sure. It was called Mistletoe. Ansel died in 1984, so he was 82 years old. I want to show you part 2 today of what I'm calling artistic simplicity. Images that have simple composition, strong composition, simple subject, stands out tremendously there. The first time it hits the screen, impact. Impact. Wow. Color, simplicity. The person sitting on the bench. Wow, you can't stop looking there. And then you come back up and the whole tree fills the image. It's just really beautiful. Simple. Impact, simplicity, and composition overall. Yes, no foreground, no place to stand, not meant to be. You're meant to just view this and see that man fishing. Simplicity. Tremendous simplicity. Wow. So effective. This one just is so striking. The foreground detail, things happening up in the skies, the horizon way down low, and that figure standing there. The single tree amongst all the snow dunes. Single tree. artistic simplicity. This one is very good. I just think this is striking, as is this one. Thank you for coming today. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you learned some things. Photograph that which stirs your heart, excites your mind. Thank you all.